She was supposed to be invincible. She was the golden girl carrying the hopes of a nation on her fragile shoulders. But while the world watched the scoreboard, a secret tragedy was unfolding just 10 feet away from the court. The cameras captured the victory, but they missed the slaughter. They missed the moment when Alex Eala, the fighter who never quits, looked into the eyes of betrayal and completely crumbled. Today, we expose the chilling truth of what happened behind those closed doors, a truth that has left the entire tennis establishment paralyzed with shock. The lights were blinding, the crowd was deafening, and the pressure was suffocating. For 2 hours, Alex Eala fought like a warrior possessed. Every swing of her racket was a cry for validation. Every point won was a temporary shield against the invisible demons that had been haunting her for months. But what the roaring spectators did not know was that Alex had entered that court already broken. Long before the first serve, a catastrophic event had taken place in the locker room. An event that shook her to her very core and made her question the loyalty of everyone around her. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated panic that she had to swallow down with a forced smile before walking out to face the stadium. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back, a girl drowning in expectations she never asked for. This was not just a tennis match. For Alex, this was a battlefield where she was fighting not only her opponent, but also the crushing weight of a secret she had been forced to bury. The whispers backstage had been growing louder for weeks. Her team, the very people paid to protect her, had started treating her like a product rather than a person. The smiles they flashed for the cameras dissolved into cold stares the moment the doors closed. She felt isolated, trapped inside a golden cage of sponsorships, media obligations, and national duty. As she walked onto the court, her heart was racing for all the wrong reasons. The adrenaline was there, but it was fueled by fear, not excitement. She looked at her coaching box and saw faces she no longer recognized. In that moment, Alex Eala was completely and terrifyingly alone. She knew that regardless of the score, something inside her was about to break. The storm was gathering, and no trophy, no medal, and no cheering fan could stop the inevitable collapse that was hurtling toward her. The Philippine flag hanging above her seat felt heavier than usual. Every time she glanced at it, she felt the collective breath of over 100 million people pressing down on her chest. She thought about the little girls back home watching her on television, dreaming of becoming just like her. She thought about the sponsors who had invested millions in her image. She thought about the skeptical journalists waiting to write their headlines if she failed. The pressure was not just physical, it was existential. Her coach had told her just 10 minutes prior, "If you lose this, you set the country back 5 years." Those words echoed in her skull like a curse. She was not playing for herself anymore. She was playing to justify her existence in the machine. As the umpire called for the toss, Alex closed her eyes and prayed for strength she did not feel. The silence in her soul was the loudest noise she had ever heard. To understand the tears, you must first understand the treachery. In the weeks leading up to this nightmare, Alex discovered a truth that shattered her innocence. Someone inside her trusted inner circle had been working against her. While she trained relentlessly, while she sacrificed her youth and her body for the sport, a person she called a friend was feeding private information to her rivals and spreading poison within the organization. It was a knife in the back that no athlete should ever have to endure. This betrayer knew her fears, her insecurities, and her hidden injuries. They knew exactly which shots made her panic and which mental triggers made her doubt herself. This person had sat beside her during meals, had laughed with her during breaks, and had whispered words of encouragement, all while plotting her downfall. The hypocrisy was so vile that it made her physically sick. But the real wound came from the reaction of her management. Instead of defending her, instead of acting like a shield, they told her to ignore it. They told her to focus on the game, to smile for the cameras, and to handle it like a professional. They silenced her. They invalidated her pain. They made her feel like her emotional well-being was secondary to the brand they were building. That is the ugly truth that the tennis world refuses to acknowledge. The machine eats the young, chews them up, and discards them the moment the tears start to show. On the morning of the match, the betrayal escalated to a horrifying new level. Private strategy documents were mysteriously leaked to her opponent's camp. Personal conversations about her family's struggles were twisted and weaponized in the media. The opponent knew exactly where she was vulnerable, not because of scouting, but because of the information flowing from the leak inside her own house. As she stood on the baseline, she was not just fighting a rival across the net. She was fighting the ghost of the friendship that had been brutally murdered. She was fighting the grief of losing people she had trusted with her life. Every time she missed a shot, she could see the smirk on the faces of those in her box who had already given up on her. Her body was present on the court, but her mind was drowning in a sea of confusion, heartbreak, and rage. She tried to compartmentalize, tried to focus on the yellow ball, but the trauma kept flooding back. She remembered the day she discovered the truth, the day she saw the screenshots, the day the anonymous text message arrived on her phone exposing the snake in the grass. When the final point was lost, she did not feel the usual pang of defeat. She felt the cold, numbing grip of absolute despair. It was not the loss that broke her spirit. It was the devastating realization that she had been fighting a war on two fronts: the opponent across the net and the traitors standing right behind her with fake smiles. The walk back to the locker room was the longest, most agonizing walk of her entire life. The tunnel, usually a symbol of transition from battle to safety, felt like a death march toward the gallows. Her legs were trembling, not from the 2 hours of grueling rallies, but from the sheer emotional exhaustion that was threatening to consume her. She had barely reached the shadows of the hallway when the dam finally burst. Witnesses who were present in that restricted area describe a scene of pure, unfiltered agony that they would never forget. Alex dropped her heavy tennis bag as if it were made of molten lead. She placed her hands on her knees, gasping for air, but it was not physical exertion causing the hyperventilation. It was a full-blown, terrifying panic attack that gripped her lungs and squeezed her heart. And then the confrontation happened. A senior official, furious at the financial implications of the loss, stormed toward her like a predator sensing weakness. Instead of providing comfort, instead of offering a reassuring hand, this official unleashed a torrent of verbal abuse that would make even the toughest veteran wince in disgust. They blamed her for everything: the loss, the wasted sponsorship money, the national disappointment, the ruined weekend schedule. They screamed at her for being weak, for crying, for showing any emotion that betrayed the brand they had carefully constructed. They told her she was a disappointment to her family and a disgrace to her country. But the most devastating, soul-crushing blow came when they leaned in close and whispered something specific in her ear, a threat that made her entire body freeze in terror. According to our insiders, the official threatened to leak a deeply private, embarrassing story about her younger sister to the tabloids if she did not get herself together immediately. They used her family, her blood, as a weapon to manipulate her grief. That was the exact moment the fight completely left her broken body. The manipulation, the relentless pressure, and the sheer vicious cruelty of the situation collapsed her like a house of cards in a hurricane. She looked at the people who were supposed to be her protectors, her mentors, and she saw nothing but predatory vultures circling a wounded animal. Slowly, her knees buckled. She slid down the cold, grimy concrete wall, her legs unable to hold her upright any longer. The tears erupted, not just silent crying, but deep, guttural, wrenching sobs that echoed hauntingly through the empty hallway. She was no longer Alex Eala, the tennis star. She was just a deeply wounded, terrified young girl, trapped in a waking nightmare she could not escape. The sound of her weeping left the nearby security guards frozen in shock, unsure how to intervene in a moment so intensely private and brutally broken. When the news of this catastrophic breakdown leaked to the paddock and the inner circles, the reaction was absolutely seismic. Senior players who had endured similar ordeals in their own careers immediately voiced their private outrage, texting each other in disbelief. Coaches from rival camps looked at each other with knowing, disgusted expressions, shaking their heads at the barbaric treatment of such a young talent. The tennis world was not just stunned, they were utterly horrified. How could the sport allow a 20-year-old prodigy to reach this level of utter despair? How could the very structure designed to create champions be so ruthlessly, systematically destroying their mental psyche? Alex was left alone in that cold, unforgiving hallway for over 20 agonizing minutes. No doctor came immediately to check her vitals. No psychologist rushed to her side to de-escalate the trauma. The staff was more concerned about the media catching a glimpse of the scandal than about her actual well-being. They panicked about the optics, not the human being. Eventually, a junior physio, a young intern who risked their own job security, knelt down beside her and gently helped her to a private room. By then, the irreversible damage was done. The images of her weeping uncontrollably against that dirty wall became the talk of the entire tennis underground. But what shook the tour even more profoundly was the deafening silence of the higher authorities. The WTA, known globally for its advocacy for players' rights, quickly issued a hollow, generic statement praising her resilience, while privately scrambling to bury the story under a mountain of PR spin. They didn't want the world to know how deep the toxicity ran within their ecosystem. They didn't want sponsors to see the ugly underbelly of the sport. But the truth is out, and it is spreading like wildfire. The betrayal by her inner circle, the abusive verbal outburst from the senior official, and the systemic neglect of her mental health have painted a picture of professional tennis that is uglier than anyone ever imagined. This is not just about Alex Eala anymore. This is about the hundreds of young prodigies currently suffering in suffocating silence across the globe, terrified to speak out because they fear retribution and the destruction of their careers. The tears Alex shed that fateful day were not just her own personal release. They were the collective tears of every athlete who has been shoved into the spotlight too young and callously abandoned the moment they showed the slightest hint of human vulnerability. Her breakdown has become a horrifying mirror reflecting the sport's darkest, most shameful secret. The world expected her to withdraw from the next tournament. They expected to see her vanish into the shadows, broken, defeated, and permanently scarred. But if there is one thing we have learned about Alex Eala, it is that true champions are forged in the absolute fires of hell. The moment she finally wiped the burning tears from her red eyes, something profound and unshakable shifted deep inside her soul. It was not just anger. It was a deep, primal awakening. She realized that the only way to survive in this ruthless jungle was to stop being a victim and start being a fierce warrior fighting for her own life and future. In the dramatic days following the incident, Alex took absolute control of her destiny. She severed all ties with the toxic elements of her team, including the official who had threatened her family. She hired new representation that prioritized her mental health over her brand value, people who actually saw her as a human being rather than a cash cow. She bravely reported the abusive official to the governing bodies, forcing them to conduct an internal investigation that they had desperately, cowardly wanted to avoid. The tennis world expected her to crumble into obscurity, but instead, she stood up taller, prouder, and more powerful than ever. She used her newfound voice to courageously expose the systemic rot that tried to break her spirit. And the response from the global fans? It was absolutely overwhelming. The Philippines, her home nation, rallied behind her with a ferocity and loyalty that shook the foundations of the internet. They didn't care about the match loss. They cared about their daughter, their national treasure. They sent thousands of heartfelt messages of love and support, telling her that her bravery in standing up was infinitely bigger than any championship trophy. Alex has now fully reclaimed her narrative. She is training with a blazing fire in her eyes that her competitors have never witnessed before. She is no longer playing for the corrupt officials, the greedy sponsors, or the abusive managers. She is playing for herself, for her family, and for the millions of people who truly love and respect her. The tears she shed in that lonely tunnel were not the end. They were the explosive catalyst for a revolution, not just in her career, but in how the sport treats its young stars. The tennis world was left stunned by her emotional breakdown, but they will be even more stunned by the sheer force of her unbelievable, historic comeback. This is not the end of Alex Eala's story. This is the powerful, triumphant beginning of her legendary legacy. If you enjoyed this shocking sports update and want to stay ahead of the biggest stories in the world, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to World Zone right now. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of the action. See you in the next video.